So I'd like to kick our session off by introducing Zach Beaver. Zach is an ex-consultant and data scientist turned software engineer who currently builds AI-driven products in Google's health division. He's passionate about building technologies that help people care for others and discovering God in the unexpected, unique, and possibly even mundane ways he's present in our work. Zach's talk is entitled Grace and Peace to You, Foundations for Worshipful Work in a Disrupted Environment.
Yeah, so the concept for this talk, or the idea, was really born out of my own experience with our new disrupted work environment, and specifically transitioning to working from home from the office. And when I was trying to think about how to describe this experience, it actually maps really well to the Gartner hype cycle. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Gartner hype cycle is, Gartner's a research firm, and they try to describe how people's expectations around breakthrough technologies fluctuate over time. So there's usually this breakthrough innovation, like self-driving cars, and people get super excited and start dreaming about the possibilities. Millions of lives are going to be saved. But ultimately, when those promises aren't delivered, there's a sense of cynicism and disillusionment. But over time, as the technology matures, it becomes more useful and productive and useful for the wider society. And I felt like work from home for me has been similar to this. I had pretty high expectations and was really looking forward to it. Because primarily, so I work in San Francisco, and then I live in San Francisco, and then I go down to Google in Palo Alto to work. And I'm thinking I get to save 3 hours off of my commute, and I get to spend more time with my wife at home. And most importantly, I'm going to have the ability to just stay laser focused on work without the distractions of office or people coming by, and be kind of this lone hacker, super productive phase of the next few months. And as the days went on, that did not happen at all. It was actually a pretty humbling experience in transitioning to working from home, where I started waking up each day with more and more anxiety. And this anxiety was growing over time. And so for me in my journey, God often uses anxiety in the sense of worry as a flag, a signal. And he's saying, something is off in your life. There's something that you are doing or thinking that is not aligning with my reality. And so as this grew over time, I just started waking up in the mornings and had this real hunger for God's peace, because my body was just being racked with anxiety. And so God was forcing and pushing me to him to sit before him and say, God, please, I need you more than anything. Can you please help me understand what is going on? Reveal what's going on in my heart and help draw me to you. And I think what was interesting is that this work from home, this disruption had actually shaken me out of some things that I had actually held, these beliefs that I had held before that were not in line with God's reality. And so the things that God started to share and to show me were that, first of all, moving out of the office means we're moving away from our coworkers. I'm not sitting around my coworkers every day and getting to gauge how my work is relative to theirs, how much they're accomplishing, how much I'm accomplishing. And I had fancied myself this kind of, I set my own independent metrics, and I work and I get what I think should be done, and I shouldn't worry about what other people are doing. But that wasn't the reality of my situation at all. What God was showing me was that I was comparing my performance to others. And at the end of each day, I was feeling like I didn't do enough because I didn't know how much I was supposed to do. And yet he was gently pushing me and saying, no, I've not called you to do as well or to be more accomplished than your coworkers. I've called you to be faithful to me, and I accept you regardless of how much you're accomplishing. And the next thing, this kind of goes back to what I alluded to earlier, was this kind of lone hacker mentality, was that I could be able to sit in front of my workstation apart from anyone else and be super productive and thinking of people more as distractions. And when work from home hit, I got exactly what I wanted, to sit in front of a screen all day, and ultimately to not be able to sustain myself. The rhythms of church and community groups also ebbed and flowed and kind of washed out. And it created anxiety because it wasn't living in light of the reality that God has set up. And again, God was gently saying, you have this sense of pride in yourself that you were able to do things on your own. But I'm the head and you get your life from me, and you're interdependent with the members of my body, the community, and your work. And so I share these two examples because these were personally what I was experiencing, but I think this is what God does in periods of disruption, right? Is that God uses periods of disruption and upheaval to shake us out of the mundane ways of our life in which we domesticate sin and we domesticate a sense of self-sufficiency. And he uses them to shake us and bring us to greater worship and joy in him. To put it a little more succinctly, looking back over church history, the author and pastor George Hunter, he's trying to see, when does the gospel take hold of people? And he says this, that persons experiencing these important life transitions, they're more receptive to the gospel than people in stable periods of life. Transition tends to unfreeze their lives and make change possible. And I think for many of us, as COVID has hit, as the disruption to our work has hit, I just want to grin and bear it, to get over it and to get back to normal. But what if God has something more for us in this period of disruption? What if he wants to use it to reveal things about our hearts, which we would never be able to see otherwise? And so my challenge for myself and for you as well is to not just think about this disruption as something to be survived, but to be leaned into, to sit before the Lord and ask him, what are you trying to teach? How can I know you more deeply? And if that sounds daunting, or you don't have a method or a way of doing that, one thing that I've found to be really helpful is actually to look at the tradition that our spiritual fathers have passed down to us, specifically a technique called the prayer of examine. There's nothing magical about it, except that it's really helpful for sitting with the Lord and asking him to reveal his presence in our lives. And so in this period of disruption, I encourage you, just maybe as a challenge, to take this prayer of examine from the 16th century and sit with it each day. Take 20 minutes at the end of your day and use it as a period to try to stimulate renewal, to lean into what God may already be doing in your life. And it looks something like this. It actually first starts, like for me, not with focusing on my anxiety or the thing that I'm most concerned with at the time. It actually begins with starting with God and asking him to reveal his presence in our life and in our disruption, and giving thanks. Father, thank you for the ways in which you showed your love today, just in the small way that my wife saw that I was discontented and worried and gave me a small snack. You use her, and you use her to show me your love. Thank you for your creation, and God, you're so smart. You make all of these infinitely complex tiny cells. You sustain the world as it rotates on its axis in cycles of death and life. God, you are so powerful and good and smart. How could I not but trust you above myself? And then it looks like moving to a time of being aware in our days of when we were either aware of the Lord or hesitant or resistant or distant from him. God, I wake up each morning and my to-do list just pops in my head, and it seems to erase all sense of your peace that I want to have. What is going on here? And then ask for truth. God, what is true? What do I think? What am I thinking about this to-do list? It feels like that I have to get everything done in the day, and that equals some amount of success. And the success is chained together with these links throughout time. And if I break that chain, then catastrophic things are going to happen. That I'm in control of this link of success, and I need to keep stepping up. But that's not what you say. That's not true. You ask us to plan and work diligently, but you are the one who directs our steps. And after asking for this truth, it looks like moving out of this time of reflection and into the world and acting out of a foundation of grace and peace. So what does it look like? I think this is the hard one, like moving out of reflection into acting in the unique and specific spheres of influence that God has given us out of grace and peace. Well, I think it's going to look different for everybody, right? The way in which you do this in your work as a software engineer or as a healthcare professional or as a policymaker is going to be different. But I'd like to leave you with a few reflections to consider. First of all, acting out of grace and peace, like where does this concept come from? Well, in Paul's epistles, you're probably familiar with the exhortation or the blessing, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And what's happening here is that Paul couches all of his messages, the specific things he wants to tell to his readers, on the foundations of grace and peace. And it's important because whenever he rebukes, whenever he gives criticism, whenever he says that you're placing people at different levels of honor at the table, and this is wrong, this is bad, the criticism doesn't crush because the people know that they're already accepted. They have a foundation of grace from which to hear and listen to criticism. At the same time, when he says you've been incredibly generous, and he puffs them up and gives them encouragement, that encouragement doesn't puff up or lead to pride, because they know that it's not from themselves, it's from a foundation of having God's gift of grace and peace. And so these foundations are the same ones from which I think we're called to work. So just to share a few implications, again, I think everyone will work these out in the unique and specific ways of their workplaces, but there are a few things that God's been showing me that have been really impactful in how I do my work. First is that the unmerited favor of the only being in the universe who matters gives us a freedom to work out of love of our neighbor, that our work is the main way in which we love our neighbor, rather than out of fear of failure, fear of disappointing someone, or for reward. It allows us to break free from the cycle of wanting fame, promotion, money, status, and power. It gives us the freedom. And to just give some examples of the specific ways that God has been convicting me. One is that as a software engineer, if you've ever written code and you go into a code base and you read someone's code that you have to work on, you know that there are some people that write code in a way that you're just thankful for that person. You can read it well, you can extend it. The fruits of your labor are amplified by what the person has done before you. You also know that if you want to write a lot of code for performance review, that you can do that and you can leave behind a trail that will make other engineers in the future unable to do their work as well as they could. And so one way in which, like, working out of freedom, it actually, for me, a lot of times looks like being empathetic of the next engineer that's coming behind me. Like, how can I love the next person that's going to be using my work and amplify their impact? I think the next thing is that it means that we are free from the approval of others. And this is the big one, right? It means that we don't have to worry about, God is our ultimate boss. Our boss is not really our boss. And we can listen to their criticism and feedback, but we know that we answer to a different audience. Again, a very mundane example is I found myself a few weeks ago just spending an inordinate amount of time writing emails. And I would get to the end of the day and be like, why am I spending so much time on these emails? And it was because they were to higher ups, people that were in control of my performance. And I wasn't focusing on the work that I had and was wasting a bunch of time because I worried about the perception of how people were going to receive me and not necessarily how to communicate effectively with them. There are little, just tiny ways in which we can let this work into our lives. So the next one is that God's peace cultivates in us a non-anxious presence. And sitting before the Lord in the morning and thanking him for being the creator of all things, realizing his control, realizing his saving power, that he has freed us from death. The glory of God just seems to have your to-do list become a little bit more dim. And the effect of that, of sitting before the Lord and seeing his glory, is so much more beautiful and bright than the to-do list and the things to do in our day. It cultivates in us, I think, a non-anxious presence that is much needed in a time with a lot of political anxiety, a lot of anxiety around disease, and just in general, a lack of peace. And then finally, having grace and peace means not only that we just receive this gift, but God actually brings us into his family. We're adopted as sons and daughters. And for our work, that means he brings us into his family business. He's the head of the business, and our work in the world is actually being part of God's work. And so what is God's work in the world? He acts as a creator, a maintainer, and a restorer. And each of us in our vocation actually gets to mimic God and be part of his work of creation, maintenance, or restoration. God is a creator who has made everything from nothing, ex nihilo. And as a software engineer, when I write code, I'm not just writing code anymore. I'm actually creating something that will help others flourish and participating in God's creative work in the world. Maintenance. God maintains the world day after day. The earth continues to spin on its axis, and he feeds and gives life to everything in existence. Those that are maintainers, professions like public servants, quality engineering, hairdressers, you're not just cutting someone's hair, you're actually helping maintain the creation of God and being his work in the world. And then as restorers, God is restoring us to relationship with one another and to himself. Through the cycles of life and death, he is restoring and renewing the face of the earth. People working in, for example, public policy or healthcare professionals, you're not just giving someone medicine, you are God's hand in the world of restoring health to a broken world. And having the sense that you are in the family, that we're in the family business, it just endows our work with a greater sense of meaning, purpose, excitement, and joy. So a challenge, I think, going forward is think about these three categories. Where are you a creator, a maintainer, or a restorer in your work? Pray over it, let it sink in, and let it animate you. And finally, why am I so excited about this or want to talk about it? Well, a lot of it comes from some of the ideas of this book. It's about a decade old now, called To Change the World. And sociologist James Davison Hunter, he basically critiques the Christian voice as being mainly a political one in the United States. And he says that after surveying our culture, that the main way in which we can have an impact on contemporary culture and provide human flourishing, it begins when the word of shalom becomes flesh, healing our hearts through this disruption. And then finally, as we hunger for personal renewal, we look for the specific and unique ways that we work not out of our own power, but out of a foundation of grace and peace that allows us to work differently in the world. And finally, I think it's just my hope and prayer that if we collectively were able to grasp and internalize this during these periods where we're reclused inside, my prayer is that God would renew a people in the workplace who would be joyful and steadfast and emerge from this crisis to bring spreading of shalom in the work. Thank you.
Zach, thank you very much for your presentation. I feel like I have just taken a drink from a fresh pool of living water. And so I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Some of the comments that were coming through during your talk was that it was very practical in the sense, that the prayer of examine and you walking us through that. But then also, I think you sharing about your own experience and some of the exhortations at the end were just very much a blessing. So thank you. I did want to ask you one question, and it maybe is because I'm kind of thinking about the presentation that Karen is going to give later on about ambition. And so you talk about peace. And, sometimes I think that peace can be interpreted as being kind of maybe passive or maybe even like a sense of resignation, like that's just the way that it is. And I wonder, how can you work with peace and yet purpose, or with ambition, or with confidence? Can you maybe pull that apart for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's counterintuitive, but in my experience, peace has often allowed me to work harder or more creatively when I'm actually experiencing it. And I think the reason is because sometimes I will think of my work as like a mirror, that it reflects back on me like a sense of identity. But in having peace, sorry, I think I froze a little bit.
You did. Do you mind repeating?
Yeah, I can wrap it up real quick. I think peace stops your work from becoming a mirror reflecting on identity. And a lot of times in working from a sense of peace allows me to work more hard and creatively because I'm not worried about how it reflects on myself. And I think this concept of flow states, like getting in a state of flow, it almost allows you to forget yourself and to be focused on the object and the purpose for which you are, for which you're working. And I feel like Christian peace should lead to a lot of flow state in our work.
Great, very wise words. Zach, thank you again for a terrific talk and a great start to our session.